Hello, everyone. Today's reading will be from Mark chapter 7, verse 24 to chapter 8, verse 10. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "Let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee, and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After taking him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh he said, "Ephphatha," which means, "be opened." At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. "He has done everything well," they said. "He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance." His disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha.
Let's pray, and then we come to look at this passage together. Father, I thank you that you're a God who loves people, that you've made yourself known, that you've got an amazing salvation plan for this world. Thank you that we don't have to guess what it is, but that you've revealed it to us. And we pray that you'll help us now, as we look more into Mark's gospel, to see more of the work that you are doing and have done, and the amazingness of your plan for this world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Who here likes to watch movies? Be honest, hands up. I expected more hands than that. I think some of you are a bit hesitant. But many of us like watching movies. Movies are great fun. One of the types of movies I really enjoy watching, and I have enjoyed over the years, and probably one of my top category of movies, would be those that have like a surprising twist at the end. The first time you watch it, you're going through, you don't know this twist is coming. You get towards the end, and all of a sudden, surprise. And then the second time you watch it, you can see the threads running all the way through. Who enjoys that type of movie? Few of you. Shame on you. It should be more of you. Anyway, I really enjoy those type of movies. I think probably because those type of movies sort of had their origin in my youth. Very old for you guys, now it's old school. But But it was, what we see in Mark's gospel here is coming to the culmination of that. Mark, in the section we're looking at today, brings to conclusion a bigger section from chapter 6, verse 30 to 8, verse 10, that really is bringing together the culmination of something very, very, very important that Mark is showing us, that Jesus is showing us. Last week, we saw that the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. Chapter 7, verse 14, have we got the verses up there? Great, thank you. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes from out of a person that defiles them." The problem there is what comes from the heart, what comes from inside. Jesus there has defined the human problem. It's not about your externals, what you do, how religious you are, which was the complaint there. But actually, it's what comes from inside. The reason your actions is a problem because of the problem of the heart. The religious leaders didn't get it. They thought that they could be cleaned because of what they did. And we saw last week they washed their hands, they washed their dishes, they washed their dining couches. They just do all these things to make themselves righteous before God. And Jesus says, no, that doesn't work. Even the disciples don't seem to be getting it. So in verse 18 of last week's section, he says to them, "Are you so dull?" The point is, they don't get it. The question Jesus is asking them is, do you even not understand? So the religious leaders don't get it. The disciples don't get it. And in verse 14, can we have verse 14 up again? Sorry, Courtney, making you jump around. It says, Jesus says, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this." Jesus is wanting us to see things the way they are. He's wanting us to understand the real problem. He's wanting us to grasp what is really needed. In this passage we're looking at today, Jesus goes on to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And here a woman comes to him, a woman whose daughter has an unclean spirit. And she comes to Jesus, she falls at his feet, and she begs him, "Heal my daughter, make her well." Now, we've seen this type of thing in Mark's gospel numerous times already. Demon possession, people coming, asking for healing. But in this case, there's a bit of a surprising twist to it. But Jesus doesn't just say, as he's done many times, "Healed, go on your way." And he can just do it. He can just say, "You healed." But first, he has this dialogue with the woman. And this dialogue brings in a very interesting and important aspect to what Mark is wanting to show us about Jesus, his ministry, and God's salvation plan for this world. Jesus says to the woman in verse 27, "First let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and to toss it to the dogs." Why is Jesus saying this to this woman? Why is he not just healing her daughter as she's asked? What's up with these dogs? What's up with these children? Did you notice the implication there? Is Jesus actually implying that this woman is part of the category of dogs and not part of the category of children? And Mark has already emphasized where Jesus is. Jesus is in the region of Tyre and Sidon. That is away from the Jewish regions. It's out in the Gentile regions, the non-Jews. The Jews in the Old Testament, they were seen as the historic, promised people of God. This woman, we're told that she's a Greek. Some translations say she's a Gentile. The word Gentile just means non-Jew. And that she's born in Syrian Phoenicia. So here we have this Greek, non-Jew person in non-Jewish territory. But she comes to Jesus, she falls at his feet, and she begs him, "Make my daughter well." One of the things we are to see of this woman is she recognizes Jesus for who he really is. And surprising thing is, this is massively in contrast to what the religious leaders of the time had been doing. This woman falling at Jesus' feet is recognizing that he's a king. She worships him as a king. She bows before him. The Jewish religious leaders, how have we seen them in Mark so far? Well, as far back as chapter 2, they've been plotting to kill Jesus. In the last section we looked at last week, they take issue with Jesus because he does not hold to their traditions. Jesus referring to this woman as a dog would have been an offensive comment. As someone might even say it's a racist comment. But actually, so what the Jews of the time would have done is they would have called the non-Jews, the Gentiles, dogs, because they were not part of God's people. They were outsiders. So you've got in this dialogue with Jesus and this Syrophoenician woman, children and dogs. Well, the woman doesn't respond as I think many of us would have responded and smacked Jesus in the face. She doesn't have a problem with that, actually. She recognizes that she is not a Jew. She is not a first and foremost child of God. But she has an amazing response to Jesus despite that. Rather than fighting with him, she says, verse 28, got 28 up there, "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." The picture here is that she realizes, and she says that actually your blessing, God's blessing, is so much that even crumbs falling over the edge of the table are good enough for those who used to be on the outside or who are on the outside. So she's got no issue with Jesus saying that you're not part of the people. And look at how Jesus replies to her, verse 29. Then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go, the demon has left your daughter." That comment in verse 28 of the woman shows that she recognizes Jesus and she recognizes the source of blessing, that it is even beyond the historic people of God. She's a Gentile, she's not a Jew, she's not part of the people, but she does receive the blessing. She receives it not because of who she is, not because of her identity, but because of her faith. This woman is probably the biggest example so far in Mark's gospel of genuine faith. We've seen rejection of Jesus time and time again by the religious leaders. We've seen confusion among his disciples as to who Jesus is. What is he doing? Jesus said in the very previous section, "Are you so dull? Are you dumb?" is a better translation. But here she understands something about Jesus. She sees him as the king. She sees him as the source of blessing that overflows even to the Gentiles. Even the crumbs falling off the edge of the table. Even that blessing available beyond the ethnic people of God. Now, I think that song we sang just before we heard the passage read, "It was finished upon the cross." Just imagine this woman one day in the new creation singing, "It was finished upon the cross." She got something about Jesus. She got something about his identity. And so she comes, falls on her feet, falls at his feet in faith, recognizing and trusting in Jesus. The second point we're looking at here, the second episode, is a Gentile included by the king. Here, Mark again emphasizes the region that he's in. We told us in the Decapolis, this is a region of 10 cities in Syria. Again, Gentile territory away from Jewish territory. In verse 32, there were some people who brought to him a man who was deaf, who could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hands on him. After he took him aside, away from the crowds, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. He spit and touched the man's tongue. Next verse, have we got it? He looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh, he said to him, "Ephphatha," which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. We've said here, where is Jesus? Still, he's in Gentile territory. Even the words that Jesus speaks to the man, Mark records the original, the Aramaic word. Mark is wanting to emphasize that this is not a Jewish person. This is an outsider. There's some things that are strange about this miracle, some things that are different to what we've seen in Mark's gospel so far. We've seen healing of deaf people. A deaf in Mark is synonymous with not hearing, not understanding. So as we see the healing of the deaf, it is a symbol of understanding. But Jesus doesn't just speak to the man and the healing takes place. There's more that happens here. We see Jesus looking up to heaven. And with a deep sigh, the man is healed. The picture there is, where is the source of this healing coming from? It comes from God. Healing in Mark, as I've said, is about the hearing in Mark is about understanding. In last week's passage, we saw that the religious leaders had issues with Jesus and his disciples because they didn't follow all these traditions. And so they called them unclean. You know, the picture was theirs. They go out into the marketplace. They buy food. They come back, eat with unwashed hands. They don't even wash the dining couches just in case, you know, some of the filth of the Gentiles have got onto it. And that makes it unclean. What happens here? Jesus touches this man. Rather than Jesus becoming unclean, defiled, the man himself is healed. He is made clean. He is given ears to hear. He is given understanding. Look at the conclusion, verse 36, after the man is healed. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He's done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. That's a very similar response to what we saw in the Jewish territory. Mark is wanting to show us that the healing, the blessing, God's blessing is flowing out beyond the Jews to the Gentiles as well. And the place where we see this the most actually is in the next episode, the feeding of the 4,000. And here we see that Gentiles are shepherded by the one and only true King. The story here, a great crowd gathers. They've been with Jesus for some time. We see that they've been with him for 3 days. Now, I assume that none of them had expected to be with Jesus that long. They brought food, but all the food they brought is gone. Now, Jesus tells his disciples that they are to go and get food needed for these people. And Jesus' disciples ask him in verse 4, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" Jesus asks them how much food they have. They say 7 loaves, few fish. And then Jesus gives thanks, and his disciples hand out the food, and they gather up all the leftovers and fill 7 baskets. If you've been with us for a while, you might feel like this is a bit of a deja vu moment. Haven't we just had a sermon on this? Did the preacher get the wrong passage? No, it's not the wrong passage. There are 2 healings in Mark's gospel. It's interesting how some people have discussed these feedings. So a few weeks ago, beginning of chapter 6, we had a feeding of 5,000. Now in chapter 8, we have the feeding of 4,000. you might feel like maybe this is one of your discussions with your grandparent moments where they're telling you the same story 6 times. Did Mark have a bit of a wobble in his thoughts as he was writing it down? I saw some smiles. No, he didn't. But some people have accused Mark of getting confused. Maybe he was busy writing the gospel and he stopped at night, obviously tired, and maybe had a rough night's sleep. The next morning, he wakes up and he now picks up, but he forgets that he's already told them the feeding story, so he tells them again. You'll be surprised as to how many people argue that. And part of the argument would be, can these really be 2 different events? Because there's so many similarities. Both take place in a desolate place. There's a large number of people who gather together. They come to be taught by Jesus. They had nothing to eat. In both stories, we're told that Jesus had compassion on them. Jesus tells his disciples to give them something to eat. His disciples ask almost the same question in the recorded accounts. There's some bread and fish in both. In both, they ate and were satisfied, and there were lots of leftovers. If you were to summarize the story like that, it's basically the same story. So did Mark get confused and recount the same story twice, just with a few small differences? There's no ways we can take that. We can't accept that view if we look at the text properly. There are significant differences, and those significant differences then mean we need to ask the question, why is Mark telling 2 of these stories? Just to highlight the differences quickly. Firstly, the location. We've already said the first feeding happened in Jewish territory, and now this is happening in the Decapolis, in Gentile territory. The number of people, Mark records 5,000 men in the first feeding, and here we're just told that there's 4,000. It's not even said men, it's just told there were 4,000. I think your translations will have 4,000 people. The reason that the disciples give for not being able to feed them in the feeding of the 5,000 is not enough money to buy food for everyone, and this time it's not enough bread. The time that the crowd was with Jesus, first time, was only 1 day. Now we're told 3 days. You see, there's significant differences. Even the number of baskets that are left over. In the first feeding, there's 12 baskets left over. Now there's 7. There's no way Mark got so confused that he got those key details wrong. Mark is doing something much more. As we've spent time in Mark's gospel, we said that Mark is very careful in arranging his material. It's not just what he thought of recording for that day. So he's not forgetting a miracle and just adding another one in. So why does Mark include both these feeding miracles? And why so close together? Why within 2 chapters? Well, I think there's 2 key points to discovering this. Firstly, recognizing the differences, and there's 2 I want to highlight here, both related. Firstly, we've said it already, Jewish area, Gentile area. The historic people of God versus outsiders. Secondly, Mark does that even more by the word that he uses for basket. Now, you won't get it in your English translations, so you've got to trust me on this. Happy to show you in the Greek afterwards. But in verse 19 and 20, the word that comes up in the first feeding of the 5,000, it's a particular word that is used for a Jewish ceremonial basket. Then, the feeding of the 4,000, it's the normal word that's used for a basket, your lunchbox, basically. Mark is wanting to make that distinction, Jew versus Gentile. Okay, but why? Why this distinction between a Jewish feeding and a Gentile feeding? Well, if we think back to the Jewish feeding, as we've seen before, the emphasis there was that Jesus has come to shepherd his people. He's come to bring in the next big salvation event. First for the Jew, but even beyond. That's the emphasis that's being made here. If we stand back and we look at the context in Mark, all the teaching in between the two feedings is highlighting this one very point. Chapter 7, verse 1 to 23, highlighted that the problem is the problem of the heart. It's not about what you do. It's not about outward human traditions or obedience to the law that saves you, but the core problem is the problem of the heart. Mark's editorial comment in 7 verse 19, have we got it up there? Just look at that section in brackets. It says, in saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. One of the purposes of the food laws in the Old Testament was to separate God's chosen people, the Jews, from the outsiders. But now, as it says, the problem is the problem of the heart. Everyone is brought under one banner. Everyone has the same problem. And what this passage shows us is everyone has availability to the same solution. The Syrophoenician woman, Mark emphasized that she was a Gentile. When she asked for the demon to be cast out of the daughter, rather than straight away healing her, extended dialogue, as we've seen. And Jesus' response to her is that because of her faith, she can be included. She can receive that blessing that overflows over the table. The purpose of the second healing is to show that the gospel, that Jesus has come to shepherd not just the Jews, but to be the shepherd, God's shepherd, for all people, all who, like this woman, put their faith in him. Let me show you one more thing. We're going to do a bit of rapid fire, so Courtney, you're ready. In Mark 6:42, this is part of the feeding of the 5,000, the Jewish feeding. So the Jews, they all ate and were satisfied. 7:19 that we've just looked at, Jesus declares all food clean. 7:27 in the story with the Syrophoenician woman, that verse phrase there, let the children eat all they want. It's literally the same. Let them all be satisfied. Then look at this. Here's the big one, 8:8. The people ate and were satisfied. This is now the Gentiles. They ate and were satisfied. We see that God has come. He sent Jesus into this world, not just to save the historic people of God, but to save even the dogs, even the outsiders, not literal dogs, even the outsiders. The woman asked for crumbs, but here we see the Gentiles in the feeding of the 4,000, the Gentiles who she represents, they get a banquet. The crumbs falling over the edge of the table, beyond the historic people of God. Feeding is blessing going out to even Gentiles. I take it most of us sitting here today do not come from a Jewish background. We are recipients of the gospel because of this, because Jesus came for more than just the Jews. You guys can go in your own time, go and look at Ephesians 2, second half. Very clear in the same idea. Mark's purpose in all this is to show that Jesus is the promised shepherd of the Old Testament for all people who put their faith in him. All people have the same problem, defiled, sinful hearts. All people have access to the same solution, the shepherd of God's people, Jesus. Irrespective of your background, irrespective of your ethnicity, irrespective of your nationality, irrespective of your religious background, if you put your faith in Jesus, you have access to the shepherd of God's people. In the first feeding, the feeding of the 5,000, and when we saw Jesus walk on water, Mark paralleled lots with Exodus. We saw lots of parallels. For the Israelites, Exodus was the big salvation event, the rescue of God's people from slavery. Towards the end of the Old Testament, in prophets like Ezekiel and Isaiah, God is talking about another Exodus-like rescue that will take place, a bigger, fuller, more perfect rescue of God's people. And here Mark is wanting us to see, firstly, Jesus is the shepherd that brings in that rescue, feeding of the 5,000. But it is open to the whole world, feeding of the 4,000. Jesus is the shepherd come to rescue and to lead God's people. He's the one who came to bring salvation for the whole world, for everyone who will put their faith and trust in Jesus. Now, I think we can very easily just take this for granted. Most of us are non-Jews, Gentile backgrounds. So we expect this. We've received this. But notice how massive this is in God's salvation timeline, that he opens up his plan of salvation to include everyone. That is what Mark is wanting to see us here. Just ponder that for a moment. You don't deserve God's salvation. You are not part of his historic people. You have the problem of the heart that we saw last week. We're all sinners, but Jesus came to bring salvation. Jesus came as the promised king, the shepherd, who came ultimately to make a way for us to be forgiven. In Mark chapter 2, we saw that he came as the doctor to deal with sin, came to deal with the biggest problem that we have, and ultimately he goes to the cross that we can be forgiven, that salvation can be open to the whole world. There is no group of people, there is no single person that you know who is beyond that salvation. Pray for all people. Don't think to yourself, this person is beyond it. Salvation is not beyond them because Jesus is bigger than that. The hardest atheist, the person you dislike most, the person who's hurt you the most, is not beyond salvation. We are to respond to Jesus like the Syrophoenician woman, and not like the hardened Pharisees who have hard hearts. But to come to Jesus, to recognize him as King, to fall on our feet before him, and to beg him for the salvation that only he can give us. It's not a salvation that's just for a particular ethnic people, but it's open for the whole world. Have you heard about Jesus? Will you respond to Jesus like the Syrophoenician woman, who comes to beg him, who puts her faith in him? It is only in Jesus that you will find forgiveness, that you'll find inclusion as part of God's people. It's only in Jesus that you can receive blessing, that you can receive the crumbs that fall over the edge of the table. That is why Jesus has come.